There we go. Okay, we'll call this special meeting of the Carmel Planning Commission to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Alborn. Here. Commissioner Allen.
Here.
Commissioner Karpetkov.
Here.
Chair LePage.
Here.
And Commissioner Locke is absent.
She was absent today, okay. I wasn't here last meeting. I just wanted to welcome our newest commissioner. We're happy to have her. She's filling a big seat, but I'm sure she can do it with style. All right, thank you. Okay, so at this time we have the public appearances on our agenda under the Brown Act. Comments for matters on the agenda must relate to the agenda item, and public comments for matters not on the agenda must relate to subject matter under the jurisdiction of this legislative body. Hateful, violent, and threatening speech is impermissible. Public comment as it disrupts the conduct of the public meeting. This is a warning that if a member of the public attending this meeting remotely violates the Brown Act by failing to comply, the speaker will be muted. Having said that, I'd like to invite anybody in the chamber today that wants to make any comments to the commission regarding any matters of municipal concern which are not on our agenda today. You can come forward at this time. Okay, is there anybody online got their hands up there?
Through the chair.
Yes, oh, I'm sorry.
I would just like to point out that staff has, we're experiencing trouble with the Zoom link.
Oh, with the Zoom, okay.
And therefore, unfortunately, we weren't able to replace the link in time for tonight's meeting. The meeting will be visible via YouTube. And as the agenda states, any comments can be distributed to staff and their email addresses on the agenda.
Okay, so we're still within the Brown Act?
Yes.
Not having the Zoom. So we're not going to have the Zoom feed at all today?
Unfortunately not.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for letting me know. Appreciate that. And I would also like to welcome our planning director, Ms. Jeanette.
Yes.
It's my first time meeting her. I'm looking forward to working with her. I'm sure as all the commissioners are.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any announcements from anybody? No announcements. Okay, that's the next item on our agenda. Okay, so that brings us to our order of business. Today we are having a housing element implementation workshop. This is just a workshop. There will be no decision made tonight, so we're just having the staff report on the updates to the housing element to comply with state law. And then we'll be taking comments from the public and comments from the commission. So with that, can we have the staff report, please?
Well, thank you, Chair LePage. I suppose with Zoom not working. Sorry, give me just a moment. Ta-da! It's magic. Whoever did that, thank you very much. So thank you to those who have come out this afternoon to talk about housing element implementation. This is a workshop hosted by the Planning Commission to talk about our 6-cycle housing element and our first set of action steps in implementing it. So our agenda for this evening, just some brief introductions. I'm Marnie Waffle, the principal planner for the city of Carmel. Our chair introduced our community planning and building director, Anna Jeanette. Tonight we're gonna give you just a brief overview of the housing element. We're gonna talk about our implementation goals of removing regulatory barriers to the construction of housing, defining some various housing types, and then also providing incentives to construct multifamily housing. I'll go through a list of topics. There are 13 actually that we will discuss. Then I'll give you a preview of some future topics that are on the horizon. Then we'll have time for public comment and discussion, and then also an opportunity for feedback and direction from the Planning Commission. So by way of introduction, the city's general plan is a comprehensive statement of the planning goals and policies of the city. It is required by state law, and there are certain components that the general plan must have, one of which is the housing element. Also per state law, the housing element must be updated on a regular cycle. We're currently on an 8-year cycle, and we just adopted our 6th edition of our housing element. So the current housing element has 5 goals. The first is to facilitate housing construction. The second goal is to protect affordable housing and improve the housing stock. Goal number 3 is to provide opportunities for new affordable housing as well as other special needs housing. Goal number 4 is to exemplify sustainable development and energy conservation. And goal number 5 is to publicize housing needs and resources. So we're going to review 13 programs that support the first 3 goals of the housing element. These programs are implemented through zoning code or Carmel Municipal Code amendments. And these amendments are limited to Title 17 of the Municipal Code, which is also referred to as our zoning ordinance. So just a quick overview of zoning districts, because I'm going to be using these abbreviations in the presentation. The CC refers to our central commercial zoning district, which is represented as the darker red color on the zoning map. The SC is the service commercial district and is represented with the pink color. RC is residential and limited commercial and is represented by the light purple. And then R4 is multifamily and is designated as orange. We're not going to be talking about any of the blues or greens. So maybe just kind of keep those abbreviations in mind, and I will revisit them again in the presentation. Okay, so presentation of topics. So first we're going to talk about new definitions that we're proposing to add to the municipal code. We're going to talk about parking requirements, Forest and Beach Commission findings, use permits, mixed use incentive and density bonus, minimum residential density, and residential density examples. We're going to look at a few projects. Okay, so I'm going to get started with definitions. There's quite a few, so bear with me. We're going to start with employee housing. So this comes from the Health and Safety Code. The state does require that we adopt a definition for employee housing. It is very specific to agricultural workers. So employee housing is defined as providing accommodations for 6 or fewer employees. And within a single-family structure, it must be treated as a residential use. It cannot be included in the definition of a boarding house, a rooming house, a hotel, or a dormitory, and it cannot be considered a business run for profit. The city cannot require a conditional use permit, a variance, or any other type of special permit, and we cannot assess any business taxes or local registration fees. So the intent here is to treat it as a single-family use. So in order to qualify for employee housing, the housing must be rented to an agricultural employee. The occupants of the housing must be employed by the owner or property manager of the agricultural business. The occupants must also have their rent deducted from their wages. Again, the owner or property manager must be an agricultural employer. The terms of occupancy are not negotiated separately, so this isn't like an individual tenant-landlord situation. And the occupants must live in the housing as a condition of employment. So super, super specific. This really is geared towards providing housing for our agricultural workers. And we are required to just have a definition for it in our code. The next definition is emergency shelters, and this is one that our code currently does address. It's nestled in the definition of a community social service facility. So it's not readily obvious where it lives, but it is in there. So the Housing Element Program commits to revising this definition just to make it a little bit more explicit that we do define emergency shelter. So the proposed definition is a blending of our current definition as well as the state's definition of an emergency shelter, and that's a non-commercial housing facility. It may or may not provide meals, showers, or laundry facilities, along with minimal support services, and this is for people experiencing homelessness. Occupancy is limited to 6 months or less. The next definition is transitional housing, and this proposed definition is straight from state law. So this type of housing is configured as a rental housing development, but it's operated under program requirements that require that the assistance be terminated and that the unit be recirculated to another individual at a certain point in time, which is no less than 6 months from the beginning of the assistance. So the idea is that it's, as the name says, transitional. It helps somebody transition into a more permanent situation. The next definition is another housing type, and this is supportive housing. This housing type has no limit on the length of stay. It is linked to on-site or off-site services that assist the tenant in retaining housing, improving their health, and maximizing their ability to live and, when possible, work in the community. All right, the next definition is a low barrier navigation center. And again, this is another definition that is just required by state law to be included in the municipal code. So a low barrier navigation center is a service enriched shelter which focuses on moving people into permanent housing. And this differs a little bit from an emergency shelter, which has limited services. This one is more service enriched. So the idea is really to connect individuals who are experiencing homelessness with income, health benefits, shelter, and the low barrier navigation center also allows for things like individuals to have partners, stay there with them, they accept pets, they allow the storage of possessions, and they have a little bit more privacy than a typical emergency shelter. The next housing type is a single room occupancy unit. The state does not have a definition that I have been able to find as of yet for this type of housing, but it is described as a type of affordable housing that consists of a single small private room intended for one occupant. These type of units may share common facilities such as bathrooms, kitchens, or lounges. Sometimes the units will have their own individual bathrooms, but there's usually a commonly shared area as well. They are often found in older hotels or rooming houses, and they are a housing option for low-income individuals as well as students. All right, our last definition is regarding manufactured homes. Again, I didn't find a real solid definition for this, but it's not a very complex thing. Manufactured homes are, residents on a permanent foundation system. Our code does not disallow these, so these are currently allowed in our single-family district. There's nothing in the code that says that you can't place a manufactured home on your property. They are an affordable and a cost-effective form of housing, and they are subject to the same development standards as conventional single-family dwellings. And that language comes straight out of state law. So by creating this definition of a manufactured home, we're just acknowledging that this low-cost form of housing is something that is allowed in Carmel, and acknowledging that it is a distinct housing type. Okay, so that concludes the definitions. We're going to move on to the topic of parking. And there are two programs that speak to parking that we're going to cover this afternoon. So when it comes to parking, the programs that speak to it are trying to facilitate more market rate multifamily housing. So the housing element isn't just about affordable housing, it's about all types of housing, which includes market rate housing. The provision of parking is seen as a constraint because the more parking that's required, the higher the construction costs are for the project. So reducing parking naturally will reduce construction costs and can make a project more viable. What we have committed to doing under the housing element is to reduce our residential parking requirement, specifically in the RC and the R4 district, from 1.5 spaces per unit to 1 space per unit. And this is a parking standard that would be consistent with what's already in place for the central commercial and service commercial districts. Along with that, we would update the parking table to reflect that no parking is required for apartments in the CC district. That's something that's already in the code. It's just not reflected in the parking table, so that's more of a cleanup item. And then also clarifying that parking in lieu fees are not required for apartments in the central commercial district. So when you have a project in that central commercial district, which is that red area, parking is prohibited. So the only way to satisfy parking is through the payment of the in lieu fee. The code says that apartments aren't required to provide parking, but it doesn't really kind of close the loop and say, and they're also exempt from the in lieu fee. So we just want to clean that up and make it a little bit more explicit. So again here, just showing the zoning map. The CC and SC again are the red and the pink. That's where the 1 parking space per unit currently is for residential. And we would change the purple and the orange from 1.5 spaces per unit to 1 space per unit. So that's the proposed parking amendment under that program. Okay, so moving on to the Forest and Beach Commission findings. So this was an interesting one. When we were going through the housing element update process, the state identified the findings that the Forest and Beach Commission must make when approving the removal of a significant tree as a constraint to the development of multifamily housing. So there's a program in the housing element that we will review the findings and mitigate this constraint. So in reviewing that section of the code, it is not specific to single family. Although we often are applying it in the context of single family, it also does apply to the commercial districts. The findings are subjective, and they are at the discretion of the Forest and Beach Commission. So staff's recommendation to mitigate the constraint is simply to add a third finding that says that the removal of a significant tree to facilitate multifamily housing would be an acceptable reason. So it would leave the findings intact for the single family district, for commercial development, but for the purposes of encouraging multifamily development, it would mitigate that constraint. Okay, the next topic is use permits. Again, kind of on this theme of removing regulatory barriers to the construction of housing. The state has identified that, unnecessary use permits can create uncertainty for developers. They can increase review times and create delays for housing projects. So we've taken a look at the municipal code and where use permits are required, and we're looking to eliminate that as a requirement. So a use permit is usually required for a use that may be compatible with the surrounding environment if certain conditions are applied to it. And some examples include vehicle repair shops, theaters, auctions. In Carmel, it also includes restaurants, multifamily residential, and underground parking. These additional discretionary permits have subjective findings, and they're considered a constraint to the development of housing. It requires that an additional application be submitted, an additional fee be paid. There's additional review and approval findings. All use permits must go before the Planning Commission for approval. And all of this takes time, and in the world of construction, time is money. So implementation of this program is to eliminate these unnecessary use permits and replace the findings with objective standards. And what this does is it transfers the review and approval authority back to staff. There's a design component to these projects as well, which is separate, and I'll speak to that in just a minute. So for now, we're just talking about the use permits themselves. So one example here is a project that has a density between 33 and 44 units per acre in the R4 district, currently requires a use permit. In order to issue that use permit, the Planning Commission would need to make the following findings. In this particular example, all of these findings are objective, which is great. That's something that staff could easily, verify. So that would be an easy change. For construction in the CC, SC, and RC at the same density, 3 of the 4 findings are objective, which is also pretty good. But that second finding is incredibly subjective. So that would be something that would need to be rewritten. The third one is residential construction at densities between 45 and 88 dwelling units per acre. And you can see there the majority of those findings are subjective. So in order to eliminate the use permit for that density of a multifamily project, more objective standards would need to be created. And those standards would be part of objective design and development standards, which we've talked about creating for multifamily projects, which include design. And that is something that is underway right now. So we've released an RFP, a request for proposals, and we're currently looking for consultants to engage in preparing those objective standards. So this is just one part of that process in eliminating the use permit requirement. The next topic is mixed use incentives and density bonus law. So currently, the municipal code has an existing floor area bonus for affordable housing. It is up to 15%. What we are proposing, again, as part of what was in the housing element, is to increase that bonus to 25%. We're also proposing a formula that incentivizes lower income units with a higher floor area bonus. And what this would do is would allow for probably one additional market rate unit in a project. So for example, right now in the very low income category, a project can benefit from a 15% floor area bonus if they provide 10% of their units as very low income. What we're proposing is that they actually get a 20% bonus, but increase what they provide to 25% of their units as very low income. So again, incentivizing those lower income units, which are the most difficult units for cities to achieve as part of their regional housing needs allocation. So state density bonus law is something that's been in effect since 1979. It's been amended numerous times over the years. Under this state law, developers can request additional residential units, which is referred to as density, beyond what the local zoning allows in exchange for providing a certain amount of affordable units. Developers can also request concessions or incentives, which are waivers of local zoning requirements to make their project more financially feasible. And some examples of these waivers include parking reductions, reduced setbacks, increased building height, and potentially others. So our obligation under the housing element is to review our local ordinance to make sure that it's consistent with any recent changes that have occurred in state law. So moving on to minimum residential density. Again, under the, in an effort to try to facilitate more, the construction of more housing, which could include conversion of existing space as well. The housing element proposes to establish a minimum density. So right now, the minimum density is 0. In looking at recent projects that include residential units, they've been ranging from 22 to 33 dwelling units per acre. So we propose a minimum density of 33. And so what that means is when a project is submitted, it's going to have a minimum number of units to achieve that density. And the thought is that it will result in the city getting more units. So instead of one, say 1,200 unit on top of a commercial space, you might actually get 3 units, which again is good for our regional housing needs allocation. Also, we are proposing to eliminate single-family dwellings in the SC and RC districts. They are currently not allowed in the CC, and eliminating them in the SC and RC would just provide additional opportunities for properties in those districts to redevelop at higher densities. Kind of in conjunction with establishing this minimum residential density, the state does require that we approve multifamily projects as ministerial projects, and that sort of ties back to our objective design and development standards. So, there's some overlap here with some of these programs that require zoning code amendments. They're really going to need to be paired with these objective design and development standards to complete the review of a project. So we're getting close to the end. I wanted to share just a few residential density examples just to kind of show that density doesn't necessarily drive the size of a building. So I have a couple examples here. This particular project was not constructed, but this is a project at 44 dwelling units per acre on an 8,000 square foot lot. And so when you look at kind of the massing and the design of this building, and then kind of keep that in mind when you look at the next couple of renderings, it's not the density that's dictating, the size of the building. So this one you probably recognize as Ulrica Plaza. This is a pair of 8,000 square foot lots, so it is 16,000 total, but at 12 apartments, each component is at 33 dwelling units per acre. And so you think about sort of the size of this project compared to that last one, which was 44. This one looks a little bigger, but it's at a lower density. This is another project that was not built. This density is only at 22 dwelling units per acre. And this is, a pretty sizable building with only 7 residential units. And then the last one, this is an older building. So 16 condos, again, 16,000 square foot lot, which is really generous for Carmel. But this is actually at 42 dwelling units to the acre. And I think what makes this one work so well is it has a central courtyard, which really kind of softens the massing of this project. I wouldn't have guessed that there were actually 16 condos in that particular building. So with that, some future topics that we'll be reviewing. Again, the objective design and development standards. We're really hoping to partner with a consultant in the next couple months and get started on drafting that document. There will be additional public meetings as that moves forward. We'll be working on reviewing our density bonus ordinance, developing our updated water allocation policy. As many know, Evan Court, our senior planner, is still working on our accessory dwelling unit ordinance update. We have some additional action items to create some processing procedures, and then also addressing unlicensed residential care facilities. So that is what's on the immediate horizon. So at this point, we're happy to take any questions, comments, suggestions. Thank you for listening. Appreciate you guys attending, and I'm happy to hear any feedback.
Okay, questions for staff from the commissioners?
So Marnie, as I was reading through this, everything that was due as of like 12/24, we're not covering everything today. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so those are future items, even though they were due. Okay.
Correct, yeah. So as you may be aware, we're currently working on amending the housing element. I'm not sure how familiar you might be with that effort, but there's an amendment process that's underway that affects some of those programs. And so we're not going to tackle those just yet because there might be some changes.
Questions for staff? Questions?
Yeah, in general, I'm interested in the side effects. When we make these changes, what can we break? What will break if we do that? For example, getting rid of the use permit for higher density, above 43. I'm not sure exactly where the 43 number comes from, but it seems like at some level, when you move above 43, you need a third floor, right? You cannot manage to put that many units in 2 floors, so we're getting into a discussion about, are we gonna allow a third floor? Or are we gonna try to encourage people to use the basement? Or how we're gonna do that? Because I'm not sure exactly, is there any relationship between the density and the number of floors?
So right now, the relationship is between density and affordability.
Okay.
So once you hit 44 units to the acre, we require that your project be 100% affordable. Once your project becomes 100% affordable, you are eligible for a number of concessions under the density bonus law. So one of those being height. So there's kind of a tool that's in place to kind of help that when you get above that 44 units to the acre.
Yeah, and the other comment is that when you build something, the biggest cost is really the kitchen and the bathrooms. That's where you spend most of the money. So if you try to control the cost of the project, you have to focus on the options where the kitchen is shared and the bathrooms are shared. So that would be the most cost-efficient way of building housing. You mentioned that there's one option to do that, single room occupancy. Is that what it's called? That sounds reasonable. That's definitely a way to reduce cost. But if you create units and each one has a bathroom and a kitchen, it is expensive to build, very expensive. Yeah, thank you.
I had a few questions, Marnie. I want to start with employee housing. So the state definition is that they have to be ag workers only. Can we expand that? Because as you mentioned in your report, we don't have any ag workers that specifically work in Carmel, but it seems like, do we have the ability to provide employee housing for the type of workers we would have in Carmel, which could be restaurant workers, or they're specific to our businesses? Can we expand that?
We could certainly, what I might recommend is creating a separate definition, just because the state's definition is so specific.
But is it rigid? It may be specific, but can we expand upon, if we meet their minimum requirement that they have to include ag workers?
I think we could, there's something we could do.
It seems to me that would be
Yeah.
helpful to our community. And then the other thing that I would just suggest that with pre-manufactured homes, if we put affordability into the definition, we're limiting, because all manufactured homes are not affordable. That's just an assumption, and they're not all affordable. So I'm just bringing up the point. I don't know if that is something we need to eliminate from there, if it puts some constraints on the manufactured housing definition. That's more of a comment than a question. Okay. Okay, back to employee housing. It says, I think concluding the definition, you can have up to 6 employees in one residence. Is there going to be is in that context, is there any tie-in to the number of bedrooms, type of use of rooms, or it's just doesn't matter?
Nope.
You have 6 people sleeping in one bedroom. Is that allowable?
Probably not under the fire code. The idea is
there might
that.
be some constraints from a safety point of view for occupancy.
Absolutely. Building and fire codes would still apply.
Okay, so that could be covered under, okay. And I guess under the community social services facilities, and all of these are all affected by the availability of water, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So when we get to the, let's see here, the density bonuses. Well, before I get to that, when you went over the it was under elimination of unnecessary use permits, and you have several tables which identify objective and subjective standards. And for the most part, what we're up against with our subjective is this, the fact that we are very focused as a community on our community character. I mean, that's a big definition of who we are, but it's a subjective standard. So it seems to me the focus that we need to do as a community is to figure out how to objectify that in ways we can. I mean, one suggestion could be that we have pre-approved styles of architecture which are representative of the historical character of Carmel, which are identified in our general plan. And so, you know, those if you say a specific type of architecture, that's objective. Whereas a lot of the language in our residential guidelines and even our commercial guidelines, although they're not very well developed, and our residential guidelines are pretty developed. I mean, they're very subjective, and that's what the state is going after in this whole quest to create more housing, is to eliminate subjective standards, eliminate the review process from committees, like us, commissions, or residential, just to eliminate all that. So everything is approved at staff level by rigid rules as come down from the state. So that seems to me be the big challenge in here for this. And so I'm just trying, and I know that you've got RFPs out for language to address this. So I'm just kind of making some suggestions and pointing it out. Okay. Let's see, where else am I? Okay, the other thing, when we get to incentives for mixed-use development, you kind of made this general statement about increasing from 15 to 25%. And maybe I'm not understanding this. You can just explain it to me if I'm not getting it. But then staff made some proposals about increasing floor area bonuses, and we have, for low income, you're proposing to go from 10 to 15%. For very low income, 15 to 20%. Moderate income, 5%. Can you tell me what's the logic in that? I'm just kind of, I didn't get it.
There's a lot of percentages.
Yeah, it's just kind of each one, it seems like it is, I mean, am I missing the logic? I mean, I get the overall idea. You want to increase the bonus density for an incentive.
Right.
But why is it different for different?
It's the
income?
ratio. It's, if you provide more very low income units in your project, we're going to give you a higher percentage of floor area bonus. If you want to provide moderate income units, that's great, but we're going to give you a lower percentage of the floor area bonus because we really want to incentivize those lower income units.
That's where you're trying to create the greatest incentives.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. I get that.
And I just want to ask a question on the structure of this evening's discussion. Are we going to go point by point, or are we just saying everything that we are addressing, like as each commissioner? How is this structured?
My understanding is pretty loose.
Okay.
I mean, I'm kind of going by point, but that's just because as I read it, I just highlighted it and
Right.
asked questions that came up.
Yeah, because I just wanted to make sure that if we are going through each commissioner point by point, then I just want to make sure that we're doing that, or if we're going to have a discussion about each topic. And then how does the public play into this?
Through the chair, if I could clarify. So workshop, there isn't an action that is requested of the Planning Commission from staff. So The chair is right. It's a little bit more of a loose format. You still have to follow the Brown Act rules. So after Planning Commission deliberation, the item should be open up for public comment, and then any response to the public comment. I do want to mention, though, if there is a particular item or something that the commission feels is very important that staff needs to consider and or include in the text changes or the ordinance work, it'd be very helpful for staff for the commission to make such a recommendation today.
And I just want to say it's my intent to allow the public to comment any way they want. If they want to make multiple comments, this is loose. I'm not going to. Initially you get the 3 minutes, but if you want to come back up because something you heard and you want to make additional comments, then that's, I'm willing to acknowledge that, because my intent here is to have a good discussion to cover all the points that people are concerned about, to get as much information as possible from the commissioners, from the public, to give feedback to the staff, and then they can take that and continue the work on these. So I'm open to multiple comments from members of the public, as long as they're not just repeating, you're developing something, that's fine. Same thing with the commissioners, however you want to handle your comments, how much time you want to take, I'm completely open to it. So I'm going to allow that. And I'm just going through the questions I had initially.
Right.
I don't want to preclude anybody from how they want to do it. I'm hoping that these will help with the discussion, answer maybe some questions that maybe you had. So that's all I'm doing.
No, that's great. And I would prefer to, discuss as we go. So if you're open to it, I would like to speak several times.
Okay, well, let me get through my questions. And generally the way I do it is I have, the staff makes their presentation, allow the commissioners to ask their questions, open it up to the public, and then we come back and the commissioners will have their discussion. Although, like I said tonight, after the commissioners have their discussion, if the public wants to make more comments, I'm going to let them do that, because we're not making a decision tonight. Right. And the whole point of this is just to have a discussion. Yeah, but exactly. I do try to do it in sort of an orderly way so that everybody gets an opportunity. But if you have a question that piggybacks on something I'm saying, go ahead. Okay. Let me know, and we'll get those questions answered. So let me just get done with that. So you answered about what the intent of the bonus density was.
Can I ask a question on that? So, Marnie, would you give us an example of, for instance, in 2.1A, in mixed use development, increase that floor area bonus, like going from 15% to 25%. Can you give us an example of like the highest density, what that would look like?
I cannot.
Sorry.
I thought the highest density you were proposing was 88. Was it 88 units per acre? Did I read that?
So a project can go up to 88. It would have to be 100% affordable. So at that point, they would get the entire 25% bonus.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So staff is proposing a 33% or 33 dwelling units per acre as the minimum.
Yes.
And then the max would be 88. Is that correct?
Yes. So what I can do is when we come back at the next workshop is make sure we come back with some examples.
Yeah, I think that might be helpful for people to visualize what that means when we're talking about percentages.
Yep.
And just a comment on the examples you gave, some of those were 100% residential and some were mixed use.
Correct.
Like the pit is a mixed use. So whereas some of the other buildings were all, they were all residential, so they may have, the one building may have a bigger mass as opposed to, another one that's just all residential. So, okay, those were all my questions. Did that generate any other questions from the commission? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. That brings up a question that I had on the density bonus. Marnie, you had mentioned that developers can sometimes request concessions. And I was wondering how that happens, especially, would that apply when we have objective design standards? And does that mean that those concessions would have been deferred from this commission to staff to make decisions on?
So yes, state density bonus law is sort of its own set of standards, which is completely separate from this. So what this is this is a local incentive where we would say, we're willing to give you a little bit more floor area than what our code allows if you're willing to incorporate some affordable housing. In addition to that, a developer can take advantage of the state density bonus law, which says if you provide this, you get this, and the city can't say no. So depending on how many affordable units they provide in their project, they could get additional density bonus. They could request, as part of their application, reduced parking requirements, reduced setbacks. So they would make that request as part of their application. They do need to demonstrate that those concessions are needed to make the project financially feasible. They can't just request it because they would like to have it.
Thank you. And then should they make that request and it's part of the application, again, does that then would not come before the city's planning commission? That decision and granting would happen at staff level?
Ultimately, that is the plan, right? That's kind of what we're moving towards, is that ministerial process where we no longer have use permits. We have our objective design standards in place, and that review can be done very objectively, checking the boxes at a staff level. So we're not quite there yet. If a project were to come in the door tomorrow, I can't say for certain that it wouldn't come before you, but that's certainly the direction that the state is trending.
And Marnie, what is the state density bonus?
It's complicated. It's a bunch of tables that, again, like if you provide this percentage and this income level, then you get this density.
And what you're proposing, does that, is this more than what the state is saying?
So this is separate. So a developer could conceivably take advantage of both, right? So what we're suggesting is, well, we already have this local incentive. We're suggesting we're going to increase it by 10%. They're entitled to the state density bonus law.
Right.
So it's potentially both.
But what you're proposing meets the minimum requirement required by the state law?
No.
So we haven't done our analysis yet of our state density bonus ordinance to make sure that it's current with state law. But kind of like with the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, we have to comply with state law. So even if our local ordinance is out of date, we still have to comply with state law.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
I was asking that.
So then is this local density bonus table optional? Because the state density bonus is not. But would, I mean, technically speaking, would our local overlay density bonus, would that be optional and something that we could consider including or not in our update?
So I think this is the optional piece. It is something that's already codified, and we made a commitment to the state that we would increase the incentive that already existed. So, that might be a conversation that we would need to have with the state if we wanted to eliminate that incentive altogether.
Okay, any other questions?
Not on that topic.
Wolf, got another topic? Throw it out there.
Okay, hang on one second. Okay, so going back to the employee housing, if we were to move in a direction where we potentially wrote something that would be more applicable to our community, such as some of the restaurants and businesses within our community being able to offer employee housing and being able to offer up to 6 people in that type of situation. Can you think of examples where that wouldn't work in our, like, to our advantage?
I think that's something that we would need to do some further research on.
Okay.
There was a point in time where the definition of family, that the state said how you define a family needs to change, and it needs to be more broad. And so this definition of employee housing specific to ag kind of trends back in a direction of being very specific to a group of people. So I would need to do some additional research to see what we could do about carving out employee housing specific to a local population. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that had come up in conversations. We've talked a little bit about, can we give priority to local workers with housing? And we've got kind of mixed responses that might violate some fair housing laws, but some other communities seem to have, a rating system where they prioritize local employees. So I think it's something we need to look into a little bit further.
Okay. I'm just trying really hard to identify and avoid any unintended consequences of decisions that we might make. And so that's why I'm asking for examples and things like that.
So you would like to see some examples of employee housing definitions of other types of employees?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Does the term workforce housing have any crossover into employee housing? Or is that just a term that comes up in discussion regarding housing? Is there a state definition of that?
I haven't seen one.
We can look at that definition,
Yeah,
but I
I can look
recall
at it
it
too.
might be tied to some
It just
sort of
came up a
affordability.
lot in the discussion, housing.
So
Okay,
then,
more questions?
yeah.
Okay.
So then going into manufactured homes and being able to offer or move into it would be moving into R1 zoning, correct?
So there's nothing in the code right now that says that you cannot place a manufactured home on a single family lot.
Okay. Have we ever done that?
There might be one,
Oh, okay.
but
All right.
I can't, that's a rumor. I can't confirm that.
Hasn't been verified. It's pretty rare.
I would think so, yeah. Okay. And the concept behind this is that a manufactured home is easy to place? Is that why it's in here?
The state has identified manufactured homes as a more affordable housing option than
Okay.
building from the ground up. So they want to make sure that cities and counties allow for the placement of manufactured homes in their communities. And so that is where this defining what it is and explicitly calling it out as an allowed housing type in the R1 district.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I don't know if I have any more questions right this moment.
Well, it'll come up. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to the public at this time. I'd like to invite anyone who wishes to address the Planning Commission about the housing element to come forward.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Brian Congleton. I'm an architect here in Carmel, semi-retired. I was in your chair about 30 years ago, and I envy you right now because this is an exciting time and an exciting subject. And when you look at the moving parts that are going on, and by the way, Marnie, you're doing an amazing job on dealing with a lot of moving parts here, and there are a lot of moving parts. I mean, we're about to get water. We have not had water in the foreseeable past since long before I moved here. And I think that we are looking at, with the new state requirements, we're looking at opportunities, constraints, problems, yeah, but opportunities. And I say that because I've done a fair amount of, not a lot, but for a one-person architectural office, I've done a fair amount of housing, affordable housing, transitional housing, short-term housing projects, and employee housing projects. And there are some opportunities here to figure out design-wise how to incorporate those things into a Carmel that doesn't believe in that. And it's a good opportunity to start looking at how can we believe in that without violating the institution that is Carmel. And it is possible. First, the employee housing, and Michael, I have to tell you, you stole my thunder. I was all set to talk about employee housing and how this is a great opportunity.
You left it in the seat here when you were...
Pardon?
You left it in the seat when you used to be the chair.
Yeah. I never was a chair, but just a seat. Okay. So with the employee housing, this is so close, and yet it doesn't fit because they say architectural specifically. And in this case, it would work so well for employee housing for the restaurants and the hotels here that you look at the possibility, for example, for the Pine Inn to develop an affordable housing complex above their parking lot just to the north. I mean, it's right there. And by the difference, I think, between workforce and employee is that employee is working for the owner of the unit that's providing the housing. And that's, to me, a nexus that eliminates the problem with whether you let someone local in or not in. The person's working for this particular employer who's providing the housing, and that solves that problem. They meet the qualification and they're in. And so developing that housing, which by its nature, it's going to have to be affordable in cost, which means affordable in size, in order to meet affordable to the user and the employer, and for that matter, any affordable housing that's not employer provided, but provided as part of a complex. There's a community versus privacy thing that is going to occur here. How do you incorporate employees who may not be at the same social strata, economic strata, as the people that live in the community that they are here working for? And how do you do that without there being friction between the two elements? One of the projects, I've done a series of projects for the Salvation Army in Seaside, and one of them is a townhouse complex. So it's a transitional complex. They're allowed to be in that complex up to 2 years. When we developed it as townhouses, and we purposefully moved the townhouses to about 5 feet from the curb. And by doing that, we created a courtyard in the center of the complex. And in that courtyard was the activities of the people who lived there, who were similar in who they were and what they did and what their families were like, and they could watch their kids in a protected manner. And they weren't putting the 64 Chevy Bel Air on the curb and taking the transmission out from under it, because there wasn't any place for them to do that. So everyone was happy with the fact that there was some privacy in the complex, a community space within the complex for those users. And I think that one of the things we'll see in Commissioner, oh boy, I'm going to try, Karapetkov?
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, I'll bet there are some silent letters in there that I don't know, but I will ask you later. Sorry about that. But his question about third story, I think you're going to see a natural transition to third story development here. And I think that's not a bad thing. And I think it can be done maybe with recessed third stories or whatever that will blend within Carmel's nature. I think basically, if there's a way to create the ordinances, the standards, to allow for creative development, you'll see these things fit into Carmel. But the one other thing I do want to say from the housing that I've worked with in redoing housing, like for example down at Pfeiffer Burns State Park, I did the employee housing down there, and we determined that there needed to be more privacy elements to the users rather than shared elements. I think if it's possible to do a single room that has a microwave and a small bar sink, that provides the privacy of a person to make their own macaroni and cheese or their cereal without having to go down the hall to the communal space. Bathrooms definitely should be with each unit. And people find that there is an integrity to life. You know, when you go home, you really have to find a point where it's yours. You can close the door, whatever it is, and it's yours. So those are the things that come to me right off as I look at all this. I know there are other things that I wanted to say. Oh, yeah. Eliminating use permits, eliminating additional applications. Madam Planning Director, please. There are a lot of applications in this town that need to be eliminated. The more this can be streamlined, the happier we will all be. And I say that in general, not having to do with housing. But the increase in applications and required permits and paperwork has just been phenomenal in the last 5 years in this town. So I hope that can be dealt with, but that's not part of what you're doing today. But I hope that. Oh, and the other thing is on the manufactured housing. The manufactured housing has also grown since 1970 when I did my thesis project on manufactured housing. And they were basically at that time double wides. Well, now you have the most amazing units from full-size homes with all the features and all the space, 4,000 square foot homes, the difference being they're manufactured in a plant and then delivered to the site and set on the foundation and hooked together rather than being built stick by stick on the site. Mr. Chairman, you're right on whether it's less costly or not. It depends on the project and how they're done. But now we have manufactured housing that can be as small as a single room with that bathroom, with the microwave, and you can stack those. I think of in Montreal, Habitat, the complex for Expo 67 in Montreal, where they created concrete shells, and they just stacked them up like that, and they were each individual units, and you could develop the inside of the unit any way you wanted. And that could be done here on a small scale. So the opportunities are great, and I really look forward to seeing what happens with what you all do with this and with all of the housing elements that you're developing right now. Thank you. And I think I went over my 3 minutes.
No, that's all right. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks.
Okay, next speaker, please come forward.
Melanie Billig. I'd just like to say, judging from the huge crowd that we have today, that we didn't really have enough notice about this for the community. And the community doesn't have, I mean, you look at all of this, it's dizzying to the average person in this community who hasn't dealt with planning issues or been before the city. So I think that the thing that concerns me most is that these are totally incredible ideas that are being proposed, changes that are being requested by staff. And the public has no idea. Just think for a second, if you tried to put, say, 6 unrelated people in a house in one of our neighborhoods. I don't think that's going to fly. I think that much of what is being proposed here is not taken in the context of what Carmel is really like. This is the state's typical narrow-minded, really uninformed approach to dealing with the housing problem. They say one size fits all, and they're trying to make Carmel like San Jose. There's no accommodation for us whatsoever. The only thing that saves us partially is the Coastal Act. So what will happen if we just blithely go along and say, well, this is what the state says? Well, you know, excuse me. We do have some leverage, but unfortunately, we're not using that leverage. The whole economic base of this town is based on you know what? Tourism, the uniqueness of the village. And all of this is designed to totally change it into someplace else. And who's going to come here? That's just one thing. The other is that, you know, we do have choices. In all due respect, Marnie, this is not I mean, you're very well versed on this, and I totally appreciate it. You've worked so hard. But you know, we have decisions as a community into what we do. We do not have to accept every single thing that they do. And we do not have to say it's our responsibility to accommodate to it. I mean, in here, I have read all of this. I mean, I can't believe it. You are supposed to protect, like the city council, our community. You're supposed to abide by the general plan, the local coastal plan, the land use plan element, and the codes. And that is what you're supposed to abide by until you have agreed, and the state, in some of its infinite wisdom, on some policies you would agree to. But I think it's just an outrage when we sit and try to accommodate in 1 square mile to something akin to a San Jose, a San Francisco, a Los Angeles. No wonder so many, over 100 cities in the state are suing the state. There are groups that have put together for a constitutional amendment to what the state is doing. Not everybody is trying to accommodate and change their community to be some uniform pattern of development that doesn't represent their community. So that's one thing I have to say. And I think what you really need to do, honestly, is to take some of these and simplify what's in this, put an ad in the newspaper and say you want to have a workshop to discuss these matters, and you will not have a room like this, I can guarantee you. And I don't think you're doing your job or you're doing a service to this community by not advertising exactly what you're discussing and how this will impact Carmel. I mean, the special meeting was not widely, notified to the public. And even if it were, even if it had been, not many people would have come because they don't understand all of this. You're not putting it in something that they can digest and respond to. Yet you're having a workshop and you're wanting community input. It's not going to happen. So I would strongly encourage you to do this. And I would strongly also encourage you not to accept everything that you're told you have to accept because it's the state. We do have some local control being under the Local Coastal Act. And I would encourage you to read that act and understand it as part of the general plan. And think about how this community has evolved and if it will really exist as a community after all this stuff that you are going to accept. And what that's also going to do to everyone's property values, that's where they're really going to come after you. Because once you have done all of this, I'm not speaking as this just for me, I'm saying there are plenty of people in this town who will rise up in arms. They don't understand what the state has done. They don't understand until they see it on the land, till they see it personally and can they can't visualize all of this stuff. So I think it's really important. It's something you owe the community, really, to explain what all of this means. And I venture to say you're going to get a really different opinion than what you might think. And maybe we'll be all surprised and people will say, okay, 3 stores is fine downtown. And to heck with parking. We'll just say we're going to go with the new modern thing that nobody needs to have parking to go into any place, that we're all going to take, public transportation. We'll see how that works out. It hasn't worked out almost anywhere yet. So I think parking is a huge issue. If any of you were downtown on Saturday, I never go downtown anymore on a weekend because it's impossible to walk on the sidewalk. It is impossible if you have to park. Saturday, this place was wall to wall, because most of you who do these things know I'm not insulting staff, but you don't live here, so you don't understand when you're talking about parking standards and stuff. Marnie, you have no idea what it's like here almost all year round. We used to have a free space of 6 months out of the year when we had tourists, and that was fine. We could deal with parking, we could deal with all kinds of stuff. Now it is year round, and it's not just on the weekend. It's like 5 days a week. And this weekend was absolutely impossible. I had to, were you around Mill this weekend? I mean, there was not a place to park, I kid you not. And there was not a place to walk. And none of us want to live in a world like that, where we can't even enjoy our own community most of the week. And I don't come down to shop until it's 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, sometimes even 5 o'clock, while I have 1 extra hour to shop downtown, because you can't find a parking place. And I'm no longer in a situation where I can walk like I used to be, and so I can't walk 3 blocks or 4 blocks. And going out to dinner on Saturday night, we had to park several blocks away from downtown into another zone, quote unquote. And then going to Sunset Center after dinner we had to go ahead and park way down in the residential area because there was no place to park downtown. So, I mean, we have to start thinking about, giving away more parking places, saying no to parking. It's just not realistic what's going to happen to this town and was already happening. And I hate to say it, but that is your job. And I have sat on 2 planning commissions, one in San Luis Obispo and one here. And so I know what I'm talking about. And I am extremely worried about what's going to happen as a result of some of these things you're suggesting.
Yeah.
So,
Before you go, can I ask you a quick question?
yes, Stefan. Yeah.
I noticed on the California government webpage that San Luis Obispo is doing very well in low-income,
Yeah, they are.
low-income houses. They have
Yeah.
like 35% target.
Yeah, they're doing extremely
How
well.
are they doing at that if you have this connection? to
Because
some-
they have land. They are not 1 square mile. They have land. They have tremendous land. They've had ag land. And for a long time, they've had hillside planning so that they kept the houses off the hillside. They had tremendous peripheral land around the city of San Luis Obispo, which is a county seat. And they had a lot of restrictions. They've eased up on some of the restrictions because they have, they've decided that they want to grow. But that's been also a decision. I mean, I was on the city council and mayor there and the planning commission there at a time when there was not that. When there was a lot of pressure from Los Angeles developers into that area and a lot of very serious, they kept the state water project out of there for years because water's growth. And they didn't want that. So, I mean, I've seen an awful lot of planning and been an awful lot of activity for the last 45 years related to these issues. And so I'm not speaking just of some, person off the street who, has a gripe. No, that's not it at all. I'm speaking to you from experience and concern about what I see happening, and also from the perspective of a person who doesn't believe the state is all-powerful and that the state has a right to dictate everything to everybody. And I would just encourage you to be really, really careful and thoughtful. And remember who you represent, and remember that, information is the most important thing, and that's what you need to give this community so they can help you make the decisions, okay? Otherwise, you're going to lose. We will lose all decision-making power if you can imagine that. I mean, I do not want to live in a city, where all the decisions are made on building and land use ministerially. I will fight that to the end. I mean, I just don't think that is appropriate. There has to be some rapport between the decision makers and those that we hire to help us. So, sorry to take so much of your time, but as you can see, I feel fairly strongly about this.
Thank you for your comments,
And
Melanie.
also about the forest and beach. I mean, I don't have a problem with sensitively looking at trees as they relate to multifamily housing. But just think for a second. If you have multifamily housing and it's landscaped properly in conformance with what happens in this community and what's desired by its residents, then the multifamily housing will fit fine. I have no problem with multifamily housing as long as you can find a property big enough to do something. But when you talk about, you're going to take down significant trees, plant new trees. Don't just say the tree's going to go, but plant some landscaping. I mean, people who live in multifamily housing have a right to have as beautiful a living space as somebody who lives in an R1. And I think what's happening too is the state with this, think about this, maybe you've already have and you have an answer. But it looks to me that R1 zoning is gone. Because once you have ADUs at 850 square feet, and once you have some of the stuff that's being suggested, there's not going to be R1. As far as I'm concerned personally, there's no R1 left in this community, as long as you have ADUs that are as big as they are. They're duplexes. You're in R2 already, so don't kid yourselves. And the community shouldn't kid itself, because that's where we're already at. But my point being with the trees and the landscaping is that, if you're going to do objective, criteria, make sure that they have the kind of amenities that every person in this community should have. And that means, courtyards, nice landscaping, and a really beautiful place to live like most of us do up here. Thanks.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you. Okay, next speaker, please. Come on up, madam.
Good evening, Chair LePage, members of the commission. Hello, Marnie. I'm Adam Jesselnick. You probably recognize me. Local architect. I've lived here for about 15 years. I live at the edge of downtown and have my office downtown. And, I appreciate Brian's comments very much. I think it's a really exciting time to live here and to work here. I think Marnie's doing an incredible job, and really everybody at the city who's been involved with crafting this housing element and putting together what is a very technically demanding set of requirements that has to uniquely fit our town that we all care about quite a bit. So just generally, I think that anything that you can do as a planning commission to support Marnie and the staff, to support the members of the community that are really interested in seeing our town be thriving, diverse, growing, and just beautiful place to live. I'm really happy to see that happen, and happy to be a part of it however I can be. So I've actually given a lot of thought and put a lot of study into some of the things that are before you tonight, and we're in the middle of a process that's, as Marnie described, an amendment to the housing element that was thoroughly vetted and adopted. But this is the part where it's sort of the rubber meets the road, because you're implementing the things that have already been agreed to. And so specifically, when you talk about the incentives, what I think is really interesting is that I think that the incentives are a good start. I don't think that they go far enough. And what's interesting to me is that all the way through the downtown, we've got examples of up to 200% FAR in some of our really beloved historic buildings. We've got examples of 88 units to the acre in some projects that people really admire and are happy to have, like Trevitt Court. So the limitation really is that floor area, and the limit has been water availability up to now, and why we don't have more housing downtown. So if it's possible to look at, I think Commissioner Allen, you asked about some examples, on a 4,000 square foot lot, if you get a 5% boost in your floor area, that's 200 square feet. So you can't, maybe you can get a very low income unit, but it's not really enough probably to move the needle in terms of boosting the housing units downtown. So, hopefully, I've done some numbers, I've done some analysis. I think that if you were to boost, say, by 20% the floor area, well, now on a 4,000 square foot lot, that's 800 square feet. Maybe you get 2 very low income units. Maybe you get 1 more moderate unit. But you provide an incentive that's really tangible to anybody who wants to do a project, and sort of have it pencil out in any meaningful way. In terms of the density, I think that there's some more study that has to happen there. But when you talk about the minimum density, the point that I wanted to make is just, I think that there's an opportunity to carve out conversion of existing square footage versus new development. Because I think that we already have provisions in the code that say second floor space, if it's remodeled, needs to go to residential. I think that tends to happen progressively over time, maybe not all in one project. So I think that's just a technicality that we need to make sure that we allow, one person remodeling a unit. It might be one residential unit on the lot. That's not going to, require the owner to all of a sudden convert all their space at the same time. So that conversion of space, I think, might happen more slowly. When you're talking about adding a whole second floor, for example, then I think that minimum density makes a lot of sense, because like Marnie described, you would get 2 or 3 units upstairs, whereas now what we've tended to see is just maybe one larger luxury unit. And I guess my last point is just, this is, I think, a process. It's an open forum. Everybody has a chance to speak their views, and that's what's really valuable about it. And I just, again, want to commend Marnie and the staff for providing these opportunities for people to weigh in. I'm sure there will be more. And again, I'm just happy to see you taking up this really important issue, and hope that we can continue to make progress on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate your comments. Okay, any other speakers want to come forward? All right, we never got back online, I assume. Okay, so we don't have any speakers online. So did anybody have any follow-up comments after things that they heard? Last call? All right, okay, thank you. Okay, I enticed you up.
I'm one person who hasn't said anything here, so I'm going to say something. One, I really appreciate the depth and the detail of all the work that you did. I'm brand new to this, so that's why I wasn't going to speak, but I am, and I really appreciate, because I read this before and didn't understand it at all, so I do agree with what you said. It's very hard to digest, but this was a great forum for understanding exactly what the plan is. I also agree that there is a density situation with people and parking. I don't know what the solution is. I think this is the forum for doing that. So I agree with, the more public participation, the better. Having been the daughter of somebody who was very much standing at this forum talking about not the growth and keeping Carmel the way it's been, and coming back as a resident now after having grown up here, we have to figure out a way to make this stuff happen. I would love to see employees of the city living in this city. I drive into Carmel on a Thursday afternoon and see all of the people driving out, and it just breaks my heart, because those are the people who should be a part of this community, and they're having to find housing outside of the community. So we have to do something different. And I wasn't going to say anything because I don't know what the answer is, and I haven't formed a complete opinion about it, but I would like there to be more opportunity to learn more, because it is a very detailed topic. And I think it deserves more public participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Concerns are always as good as comments, so, as solutions. Thank you. Appreciate your taking the time to share that with us. Okay, we ran out of people. And I'm a little surprised that more people didn't show up for this. We do notice it, and there will be other opportunities, but I thought we'd have a little bigger participation, because it is a real important topic for our community, and we're talking about the future of our community, as a lot of the speakers have acknowledged. So, but there's going to be more discussion about this. This is just a workshop. We're not making any decisions tonight. And I think it's helpful for all of us to get a better understanding, because these are complicated issues. And the more we talk about it and ask questions of staff and hear from the public, I think we get a much better understanding. So having said that, I'm going to invite the commissioners to make their comments at this time. Would you like to kick it off, Commissioner Karpetkov?
Yeah, I can start. So first of all, I think it's very important that we have this discussion, because the last time we discussed the housing element was March, April last year, and you forget, right? So have we talked about that later, after March or April? No? Okay. So that's important to have this reminder, and just remember the key elements that we need to address. I was listening to the comments from the public, and I think that maybe we can try a little bit different approach to that. So far, we have been trying this more traditional approach where we take the state requirements, we try to figure out how to meet them, but we don't know exactly what kind of people are we going to attract. And obviously, the community is concerned that maybe that's not the right people for our community. There may be conflict, there may be problems. So I think, and I've seen other cities try to do it in different ways. Some cities focus on retired citizens, on retirees. I've talked to some people in the El Dorado County, for example, where the whole town is kind of saying, okay, we're going to meet the housing element by building more housing for retirees. I don't think that that's the right approach for us, by the way. Other cities may go after the student population. If we are Santa Cruz, if we are San Luis Obispo, I would say, yeah, that's the low-hanging fruit. Students, and I've lived in student cities, they can live on a much smaller space, they can share amenities. It's kind of, when you're 20 years old, you don't care that much about how many bathrooms you have and how big is your kitchen. So that would be a good solution if we are kind of like a major university town, but we are not. I'm not sure if we can actually, if we have enough pull to pull people from Monterey to live here, like students. What would work for us, I think, is younger families. If we can attract, because you know what the kind of the average age of people living in Carmel is 70 something right now, 75 maybe. So, and we're always talking about that we need to bring younger audience, more energy, more kids, etc. If we can do that through attracting younger families who are probably not at a very high income level, but they're in the beginning of their careers, and this low income housing is going to be just a stepping stone to get into a permanent housing, right? I think that would be smart, because you're actually adding a permanent member of the community or members of the community. The way I would approach that, the way we approach that in corporate America, is basically we're building a persona. So you're trying to, before you make a decision, you try to imagine who is that person you are making the decision for. And I would say a young family early in their careers, maybe one of the members of the family is with the kids, doesn't work. The other member is making somewhere between, I was looking at the numbers here, our AMI for Monterey County is about $103,000. If we're looking at 50% to 80%, or even going into moderate income around 100%. So somebody is working in that family is making somewhere around, let's say, $80,000. And then we need to think about it, how much money they can spend on rent. Maybe they can afford to spend $2,000 a month because they have free schools, right? Our public schools are very good. That's another good argument to target young families. And then from that, we can figure out what policies to put in place to create housing for that particular persona. Because if you don't, you may go and create too small apartments that are not applicable for families with kids. And they're not going to come. They may like the schools, they may like even the price points of what you're putting on, but they don't like the fact that they don't have a separate room for their boys and girls, right, for the kids. So we have to be very careful here to figure out what is the type of, who is our customer, basically, for this. And I think it's a great opportunity, because we're always talking about changing the profile of the population, getting a different dynamic, different energy in town. And that would be an opportunity to do that if we can figure out, who are we talking about? Is it a young family between 30 and 40 years old, early in their careers with one or two kids? Is that the kind of the persona we're trying to attract to town? Is it feasible? That is something. Young professionals, for me, my wife and I are young professionals. We know how it feels to live in Carmel, so I can tell you that may work, especially since the schools are good. So I think that would be my recommendation. And maybe we can find some other, when you go for this persona conversation, you sometimes come up with some unexpected results. you may identify some additional profiles that you haven't thought about. But I think that would be a better approach to the topic. And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this session because I almost forgot what we discussed last year. Thank you.
Commissioner Albert, so I can make your comments?
Yes, thank you, Chair. First, again, Marnie, thank you. You are our subject matter expert on this, and we are lucky to have you. This community is very fortunate to have your commitment and your willingness to go through all of these details and sort out what's best for this town. So thank you. As I've been looking at all of this information regarding the housing element, I personally keep going back to the fact that our municipal code is really subordinate and serves our general plan. And I'm just going to read the first two sentences of the general plan because I think it's worth doing. This is the general plan for Carmel-by-the-Sea. The purpose of this general plan is to favor the general interest over the special interest in order to give durability to the Carmel experience and our special quality of living. This general plan is a comprehensive statement of the planning goals and policies for the city of Carmel-by-the-Sea and its surrounding sphere of influence. Durability to the Carmel experience. I mean, what an amazing phrase, really. I think it's amazing. And our special quality of living, and I think we all share in an understanding of that. So that was my first comment. And then I was wondering if I could ask a question of Mr. Congleton. Sir, you have quite a bit of experience building workforce housing, employee housing, those sorts of projects. And I'm wondering if, in your experience, had you ever worked with sets of objective design standards related to those projects?
Not really. The locations that I was working with were not, they didn't have as extensive standards to begin with. The Seaside is the location of the Salvation Army projects. They were kind of more open to all types of development, and so there were not, fences to climb there. And the State Parks project was State Parks land, and it was in support of their operation. So I didn't encounter those.
Mm. And as you know, the city is approaching creating several objective design standards for this housing project. Do you, and I know this is an off the top of my head question to you, but do you foresee any particular challenges that the city will face as we begin drafting those standards?
Oh, absolutely, as do you. I mean, I see challenges as an architect to try to be creative within a fabric of what could be fairly rigid standards. Mm-hmm. And so my hope is that the fabric that's created will allow for creativity and diversity in design. And in support of what Melanie said a few minutes ago, I really have very high respect for your body in your review capacity. And one of my fears has been that rules and regulations will either prohibit the ability to creatively design or allow a staff member to deny creativity. Mm-hmm. And so to simply say you can't legislate good design is a kind of one of the things we stand by. And my hope is that what happens is that you have a fabric that will allow staff to properly assess a project and present to you what they see as the difficulties and the opportunities there, and allow the design a person to make use of the fabric to create a design, to have room to be able to look at different options. Unfortunately, I'm not able to tell you how that's going to convert to legislation. I don't envy you that part, or you that part.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Complete? That's your comments? Okay. Commissioner Allen, your comments, please.
Okay, thanks. So it's interesting because Commissioner Kara Petkoff, you were like thinking the same as me in terms of who is it that we're actually looking to accommodate, and what is the overall objective when we're looking at low-income housing. For me, this plan was built and pieced together from the bottom up, and a lot of times I like to see what the big picture would be first before we start to put the components into place. And I've always felt like we missed that. And so trying to connect, like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish in the long term for this community? And then the plan falls into place. It's almost like, function follows strategy. And so I have a really hard time visualizing what infrastructure has to go in before we have the community that we're looking to attract. And in your example around young families, I struggle knowing that, our hamburgers are $30 and there's not a lot of daycare, and the things that would be important to a young family, and thinking that they would have to leave town for every service doesn't even make sense in my head. And so that's what I grapple with, because I don't know exactly what it is that we're trying to accomplish. In one of the conversations that we had years ago, or a couple of years back when we were talking about this, I loved the concept that we need a vibrant community, obviously, and we need to stay exciting and high energy, and the way to do that is to bring in young people. I just don't know if we have the infrastructure for that, and we're not talking about that. And for me, that seems like it should be part of the conversation. And so I feel like I would be very conservative around making significant changes in density and in, relinquishing a lot of our parking. And I, at this point, wouldn't recommend that we exceed anything that the state is asking us to do, that we don't exceed that. And I don't think I'm ready to give up the concept of, we're going to reduce unnecessary use permits, but I don't feel confident that we have the objective standards to be able to do that. And so I would like a lot more conversation around this, and I would like to include what is happening with the amendment to this, because I think that plays an intricate role in how we proceed, looking at this. And then just, as much data as we could collect would be great. I don't even know what the market here is in terms of rental situations. Are they immediately filled the second they're vacant, or do they sit on the market because they're too overpriced? I'm just trying to get an idea of what we would be looking at if this is if we build it, they will come. I don't know. I mean, I assume, because we all love this community so much, but is that the case? And so I do think that I would like to have more meetings very soon, if we could.
Thank you, Commissioner Allen. What's motivating this whole conversation is the fact that we have a housing element. And that is, and I know people have different views about what's happening at the state level and whether we should follow or not. And I'm not an attorney, and I don't want to discuss that. But we're involved in the process. We completed a housing element which was accepted and certified by the state. So we made a commitment to supply housing, and there's talk here about who we're supplying that for. Well, that's been determined. We have a range of different costs of housing, which has been specified by the state to the county, and we got our portion. So that's been done. Is that correct? That's correct, Mary, right?
Yes.
So, and it's not, and when you say type of person, it's how much money they make. That's how we qualify this. It's based on economics. And the whole idea is that, housing is a commodity. We buy it. You either own it or you rent it. And I believe the ratio in this community is about, correct me if I'm wrong, I read in the housing, like it's 53% ownership and it was 40-some% rental, So that's a number, that's a data point. But the way that the state, and the way our housing element is approaching this is based upon income. And we have categories of income. You got market rate, and then it just goes down. You've got, moderate income, low income, whatever. And those definitions are specific, and you can look them up. And I don't have them on the tip of my tongue. But that's how we're dividing this all up. But the point I'm trying to make is we made a commitment to the state with a certified housing element. I know it's controversial. I know there's discussions going on about now where are we going to build that. And that is all part of developing right now. There are amendments that are going to be proposed to that, how that housing is going to be allocated across the community, where we're going to build it. And those are all going to be ongoing discussions. And I look forward to that. And there's been a lot of really good people working on this. But the bottom line is we have a housing element that we made a commitment to the state, and that's what's motivating this. And it gets down to two things: affordability and density. And in our system, if you create more of something, it's cheaper. Supply and demand. And we live in a little 1 square mile town, which for the most part, we have a mix of zoning, and that's another point. We're not talking about the R1 district tonight. All these, as I understand it, all of these possible changes or amendments to the code are all in the four semi-commercial. You got the CC, the central commercial. You've got the residence commercial, service commercial, and then the multifamily, right? The R4. That's all we're talking about. And Melanie, you're right. There is no R1 zoning anymore. It's gone. It's gone. You can build 3 units on every single R1 lot in the state as long as you have enough room to do it. And that's because of the ADU law. And you can also subdivide lots if you have enough square footage. It's mandated. You can do it. So there is no more. You have a comment you want to make?
I just
Go ahead.
wanted to follow on that, because I've been sitting here thinking about what are the areas where you can develop housing. The ADU does not develop housing in Carmel because it's not being rented. It's being used by the families of the homes because they can build the ADU for extended family members. And they may use it as a rental, but only under very limited circumstances. So I don't think the ADU does that, and in a sense that maintains.
But Brian, it qualifies in our arena requirement. That's all that matters.
It does qualify, and
in terms
that's
of
true.
in terms of the housing element.
But if you're looking for rental housing to actually, because I thought the ADUs were not meeting that requirement.
Well, it's up to the property owner how they want to use the ADU. That's
true.
That's their property rights,
true,
and that hasn't been changed by the ADU law. The only thing that the ADU law does is it destroys the R1, zoning classification by creating more housing. And the whole thing, what's going on is we're trying to create more of a commodity. So your point is right, and I don't argue with that, but I'm just saying that in the context of the housing element, it does satisfy part of our arena requirement.
Okay, and I want to go one step further with that, and I think of the number of empty houses in this town, and pose to you as a possibility to look at whether it's the ADUs or the affordable housing in the central districts, or something later in the R1 district in the way of affordable housing, to actually repopulate the town. The town is empty enough that people are actually scared to live on certain blocks.
There's been some proposals about taxes on vacant houses and stuff, and those are, there's conversations out there, and I've heard some things thrown out. I'm not that familiar with the consequence or the depth of those things, but that's a whole nother issue as far as second homes vacancies.
I'm just saying, what if there were a way to merge that with the housing that's needed? And I don't see it, but I'm asking.
I haven't really heard anything. All I've heard is just things to disincentivize, people having vacant properties by increasing taxes. So, did you have a comment, Melanie? Come on up. If you come up to the microphone, because we got to get it on the record.
Can you, the next time you have a workshop, can you do what we do in Design Traditions? Can you get us around a table instead of this kind of thing and have a few mics? This is so, most people can't handle it.
We did that format before. I don't know why we haven't been doing that lately on these workshops. Is there some reason why we didn't? Because we used to do that.
I'm waiting for the new mics.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It's an equipment problem.
This community is unique in more than one way, and we all know it. But it's not a unique phenomenon in the country or in the world. People with a pile of money need places to invest it. The stock market is not the only place, and you all know that. They buy real estate, and they buy places where the value never goes down because they're unique. So you go to the East Coast and you've got that, you've got Nantucket and whatnot. You've got, the South has the same thing. And even Texas does on the Gulf Coast. You have unique areas that are valuable, not because they're just wonderful places to live and beautiful environment and so forth. It's because they're unique. There's no place else like them. You don't have Carmel in Kansas. And so, the market, it determines it. You guys are right. It's all about money. It's all about the market. And when people can come here and watch their money escalate, I'll just tell you one story. Next door to us, our neighbors died, the husband. And the wife, luckily, they met here. Luckily, she still had her darling cottage on Lincoln. Well, when they got married, they both had children and grandchildren. And so they wanted, a bigger house. So they bought the house next door to me. Well, the husband dies. She's got her house, which is great. And she was asking $2 million for it. Well, this couple came up to her, and said, I'll give you $3 million. I want this house because I bought the house next door to it. and I have a large family, and this man makes about $35 million a year. And how many places on the planet can you invest in? How many things can you invest in when you make that kind of money annually? And so, you know, we're now in a spot, you guys, where we don't have people like us living in this town. We've got people with a lot more money than we'd ever dream of. But that's what is the problem here, is that the value is so high because this community is so unique. As a coastal community, this isn't like all the other coastal communities. You think anyone's going to go invest in Fort Bragg? You know? Or even like, you know, Darling, Mendocino? No. So we've got a real issue. And another issue is now with financing. For a family to afford to come here, I mean, there's nothing you can do for a young family to make it possible for them to come here, because you have got construction costs that are through the roof. You have mortgage rates that aren't going down. They've only gone up. And so we've got an economy that is not conducive to construction. And that is a huge problem. And yet the state doesn't even recognize that. I mean, they just say, you know, you do it, and everyone thinks they have to jump. I don't even know if you all are aware that when the state started doing its interest and creating this interest in developing for housing, they did a study. They didn't pay any attention to their auditor. They quoted that we needed 250 million houses approximately. Well, after they had already started this, it was found out, and this is not my dream. This is something that, you know, I have read, and it was out. I read it from the state. State auditor came out and said, we don't need anywhere near 250 million people. We need a plan in this state for approximately 100 million, you know, people. And the state did not modify anything they have done, you guys. They are still going with these figures that they pulled out of the air somewhere. So, I mean, there are a whole lot of things going on that we have to be cognizant of.
Melly, I understand these broader macro issues, but we're focused on here trying to create more housing, affordable housing, which is exactly what you're saying. You're talking about really expensive homes, and the prices are being bid up because there's so few of them.
How are you going to change
But
that,
so this what the focus of this discussion, what's being presented to us, are modifications to possible modifications. It's just a workshop to our municipal code, which will increase more density in the commercial zones, not in the R1.
No.
So how you feel about that?
But it depends how you do it.
We've got some specific suggestions here from staff.
If you're taking away all of the parking, what is going to happen to the downtown? What seems to be forgotten is what drives this community, which makes this community possible from the day one, is its uniqueness as a community. It's a tiny, tiny community. That's why you all are here, is because it's special. And the point being, we can't service everybody that we think we can possibly. We have to be sensitive to the fact that, you know, if we were in a different area, if we were even in Salinas, you know, there is land there, but you don't want to take agricultural land for a lot of housing, except for the farm workers, is my attitude. I don't want to see a bunch of cities created artificially to provide housing in one of the most important agricultural areas, but I do want to see some housing for the people who work in the fields and who live there. But here we have the state with a whole section on that, and what have they done themselves to help these people? Nothing. virtually
Well,
nothing.
we're
except throw it
we're
on
not
the
really
local
here
control.
to argue about what the state is doing or not doing. We're really
Well-
trying to focus on our housing element.
Well, I think that's
So-
short-sighted, because
so-
the point is, Michael, we have to respond to what the economics of the country are, as well as what the area is. And if we kill our downtown, then what are you going to do? You cannot just stack up a bunch of housing, quarters downtown and think that that's going to maintain the quality of life.
So basically, what your position is we should not lax our parking standards.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think we have to be
all right.
very
That's-
careful
I just
about
wanna-
that,
I just
because
wanna
we
get-
can't even live
I
with
just
what
want to
we've
get
got
some
now.
specific recommendations or opinions, concerns from the public about how they relate to this particular document, so we can focus on
It's really
that.
complex with parking. I don't think it's as simple as saying, well, we'll take a half a parking place away from this and give it to this. I mean, somebody has to, as I said in my very first statement, we need a parking study. I am tired of people just talking about, we'll just do a little here and we'll do a little there. We have an acute parking problem in this town, in every single district, and we need to have somebody who knows something about parking, that means a parking consultant, and come in and analyze this town, and so we can make an intelligent decision about land use. We're not going to make an intelligent decision about land use because you do not have the proper information to make these kinds of decisions. I mean, I think it's really, really important. We demand it in private projects. I mean, we had to do huge parking studies in the projects that Harvey and I have done.
So what you would like to see is you would like to see a formal parking study done.
I would like to see a formal
Okay,
parking
all
study.
right, that's a
done,
good
just
suggestion.
like any other major project would be done any place else in the country.
That's a good suggestion, and I think that's something that staff can take and incorporate it into, how they're determining what the parking standard is.
Because then I think, honestly, we can feel more comfortable when we're making these suggestions. Because the
Okay,
community
that's a good
is
suggestion.
outraged about the parking problems.
Yeah, it's a real issue, so
It
that's
is
a good
real
suggestion.
issue, And it's not the question of not having people here. It's how you're going to accommodate them. And we don't have a New York City type of, subway with really intricate peripheral neighborhood, tentacles. We don't have that at all. And so when we're talking about doing stuff, land use is more than just, talking about moving things around on property. It's also how you move the bodies around. So I think that would be a really good idea. That's one of the most important things, besides making these meetings more involved with the public and not on this kind of level.
All right, we'll thank you for those comments, and we're going to,
Yeah.
I think staff has heard this from the public before, that they'd like to have a more informal type of discussion, a roundtable discussion when we have these workshops. And we had them in the past, so I think we should probably move in that direction. Okay, I'm just going to do one last thing here. What I've been trying to do, as you can see, I'm trying to get us focused in on this particular document. And the reason that I brought up the fact that we have a certified housing element is because that's why we're going through this. So I think we have an obligation to focus on this. And I'm going to summarize, and then you guys just jump in if you think, because what I'm trying to do is give direction to staff. Okay. So.
Before you do that, though, can I just ask, Marnie, what exactly was your goal to take away? Do we have to actually approve the definitions that you proposed or anything like that?
No, we're just looking for feedback. So we want to have an open discussion. If you have concerns, if you want to see additions, changes to the language.
Okay.
So all of the feedback so far has been really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna kind of summarize what I heard from all of you and the public. And the first thing I heard was, can we expand the definition of employee housing beyond ag only? That was something that I heard people say. I got some notes here. Hang on a minute. Let me get my notes. Okay, I also heard incentives aren't going far enough. That was, I think, Adam brought up that point. And I think what he was talking about, what I heard was increasing the FAR downtown. I think that was, am I getting that right, Adam? If I'm not, come on up, add what you want. The other thing that I think I heard Commissioner Allen talk about was a better understanding about the density bonus allocations. Was that specific to your comments?
So I feel very conservative in terms of I would not want to go any higher on the density bonus than what the state already has.
So the state would be the minimum. You wouldn't want to go beyond that.
Would be the maximum.
Okay, all right. That was your specific thing. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Also on the density bonus, a little more clarity on when developers could be approaching staff for concessions and what that process would look like.
Okay. Let's see. I think, Commissioner Karapetkov's comments related to when he was talking about families, I think he was talking about affordability, and I know that we have requirements in the RENA number. So I guess what I would recommend to staff when they bring this back, if we can just have a little more, they can explain those RENA numbers, what the classifications are for particular economic levels, and then just relate it more to the how it interplays with what's being recommended in terms of the changes. I know you've already done that to a point, but I just think it needs to be a little more specific. And I'm just talking about not so much in changes, but in terms of discussions, because this is a complicated subject. As Melanie said, this is really complicated, and it just requires a lot of discussion, a lot of answering, and really getting down in the weeds on it. And it's ongoing. We're going to be talking about this housing thing every 6 months forever, it seems like to me.
Until 2031.
Yeah, until we get to the next, and then we're going to be in the 7th cycle. I don't know if I'm going to be here for that, but...
Yeah, Michael, what is confusing with the way they define these different categories is that they say median income per household. Now, the household can be one person, can be a couple, they have 2 kids, right? Is it the same for the state? No?
Yeah.
They have some formulas in there?
We have tables that we can bring back and share with you.
I think it would just be helpful to have those tables at the discussion. It just focuses, answers a lot of questions that are out there about all this stuff.
We got mixed reviews on the unnecessary use permits. Some people were hesitant to give those up, but then some people were suggesting that we do. So it's kind of a mixed bag on that one.
Okay.
And also on the meetings, Commissioner Allen suggested we meet again soon.
Regarding the house, going over the housing element?
Yeah, so I believe Commissioner Karapetov gave an example of the last time we talked about this was March of last year.
Yeah, we were under the gun to get that housing element certified.
Yeah, so we need to have more frequent meetings around this if this is truly going to work.
This is a lot of work for
advertised.
staff, and I think we have to acknowledge that they can only do so much, to get ready for these. And you're trying to meet certain specific goals, is what you're trying to do.
Well, and so we didn't have a Zoom connection tonight, and we didn't have an audience. No offense, we had a very small audience. Yeah, so feels like we should have another one, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, okay, I think that's some direction for staff, that we have another workshop before they come back with their, well, the other thing that's up in the air is you've got these RFAPs for definitions on objectivity and a couple other items, you know.
So we're going to be doing a lot of stuff in phases. There was the deadline of December 2024 for a series of things. There's another series due in 2025, 2026. So it will be an ongoing conversation.
Yeah. And I hope more of the community comes to these, and then they'll get up to speed on these issues, you know, that they're concerned about, understand how the city is trying to deal with it, and then you know, we can get you know, specific direction and better understanding on the community. And I hope more people get involved. I really do. Right now, we just put the notice out there, and it's in the Pine Cone, right? What else?
We did send it to the Pine Cone 2 weeks in a row, but I'm already thinking about some additional ideas for publicizing.
We should get in touch with Mary Shively and have her write a pre-article.
Yeah. So we'll extend our outreach efforts.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a big follow-up article in the Pine Cone about this meeting tonight, and that's great, because that increases public awareness on it, and I think that's one of the things that the Pine Cone really does. And I think we're lucky to have such a really good local newspaper that really covers a lot of issues, and definitely covers all the issues in the city. So that was pretty much it. I mean, the parking standard, we had a pretty good discussion about that and feedback. You know, I'm going to be interested to see what comes back from outside consultants as far as, you know, creating objective standards which also protect, you know, the character of this community, which is so unique, and which is so important to all of us, and which is so valuable to all of us in terms of, you know, on so many levels. So, and we are in a situation, you know, all communities are constantly changing. But I think what Carmel does, and which is hopeful, is that we are very actively involved in directing that change. You know, so that's, and a lot of communities aren't. You know, I think when people use examples, they see other places, they see they change, and not for the better. But I think Carmel is very actively involved in trying to, you know, direct change, which protects our architectural and our community heritage, but also meets the challenges that we currently have to deal with. So any other comments or direction? I want to thank everybody out here, this huge crowd. But, you know, I gave you a lot of time, and you really filled up the air, so that's great. So anyway, thank you all for coming and participating, and unless staff or the director has anything else they'd like to tell us, I'm ready to adjourn. But
I do not.
Feel free. Nope? All right. Thank you. We are adjourned.